Hello and welcome to the Curator Salon podcast. I'm your host Geeta Joshi, and in this episode I'm going to be talking about Instagram for artists and why it can feel like you are constantly posting but nothing is actually building. There's something I keep noticing when I speak to artists about Instagram, and it's this strange feeling that they're doing a lot without feeling like anything is actually building. They're posting, they're sharing their work, they're trying to stay visible, and yet underneath it all is this quiet thought of why does this still feel like it's leading nowhere? And honestly, I think this is one of the most frustrating parts of being an artist online right now, because it's not that you're not doing anything, it's, it can often feel like you're actually doing a lot or too much even, and you're trying to keep up with the content, trying to stay relevant, trying to show the work and not to disappear from the algorithm, but eventually it starts to feel like you're feeding something constantly without getting much back from it. And I think one of the reasons this happens is because most artists have never actually been shown how content is supposed to work. We've basically been taught to think of Instagram as a place to display things. And honestly, this is kind of like 2015 Instagram. It's not how we use it in 2026. And this looks like, well, here's a finished painting, here's a studio shot, here's the exhibition update, here's the thing I'm selling. But no one really explains how all these pieces are meant to connect together. So everything that you start posting kind of ends up becoming a bit isolated. You post something, people engage with it for a day, and then it disappears. You post again, and same thing. And over time, it kind of creates this feeling of constantly starting from zero, like momentum isn't carrying over. And I think this is the point where a lot of artists start resenting Instagram or quietly decide that they are just bad at marketing. But honestly, I don't think that is true most of the time. I think the bigger issue is that artists are trying to create an outcome from content that has no real structure under it. And what I mean by this is your content isn't supposed to just exist in isolated posts. It's supposed to work together. Some content should be helping new people discover you for the first time. Some content should be helping people understand your work more deeply. Some content should make people feel closer to you, the human behind the artwork and your creative process. And some content can be gently guiding people to whatever the next step is, subscribing to your email list, showing up in your DMs, buying your work, and so on, or showing up at your exhibition. But if all of these things are happening randomly or not at all, then your audience never really moves anywhere. They just consume isolated posts. And I think this is why a lot of artists feel confused when they get the likes but not the sales, because likes can happen very easily, but buying usually happens after familiarity and even proximity to the artist, or that feeling of proximity, like they know the artist, like they know what the artist is about. So after somebody has spent some time with your work, your ideas, your perspective, your process, all of this is now creating that familiarity, and that's the part a lot of artists skip, sometimes accidentally. I feel like a lot of this comes from treating Instagram like a billboard. You post the thing, you hope the right person sees it, but social media isn't really a billboard, right? It's a social platform first. This is what it really rewards. It's much closer to relationship building, and I think the really easy way to audit this for yourself is to look at your last 9 posts, what we call the top of the grid. Would somebody actually understand enough about you or your work to, 1, follow, and 2, join your mailing list or make a buying decision? Is there enough information there? Because this is where I see artists accidentally kind of getting stuck all the time. If you're treating Instagram like a billboard, then this often looks like posting a finished artwork with the title and maybe dimensions and materials, or a list of hashtags, and that's it. There's nothing contextualized in the artwork, which means people might double tap it, you get a like, but you're not giving them enough information to actually form a connection with the work, or enough emotional content to move them towards buying. So that is where you're getting some attention, but not the conversations or the DMs, not the buyers or the collectors. And on the other side, I also see artists swing too far the other way into the process content. Now, I see this a lot with artists of all, different mediums and art forms and things like that. But this is where, like, a ceramicist, for example, would be talking so much about glaze, or, a painter about, again, the materials and things like that. Now, a lot of times process reels can do really, they can actually perform very well because they do create an open loop in the brain. I had somebody sort of mention, and I did a reel about this recently, about when they were painting the edges of a canvas, that reel performed super well. And it's because it creates an open loop in the brain that we want to see a resolution. So anytime we kind of have an open loop in the brain wants to, have that question answered. They want to see what that thing looks like finished. As such, this sort of content, keeps people watching because there's also a story arc with a beginning, middle, and end. That said, when we watch content like this, seeing the artwork resolved or the edges of the painting completed or whatever it is, there is a bit of a sigh of relief subconsciously that has kept us watching to the end. Even sometimes these can be time-lapse, sometimes they can be slow. But this kind of content performs very well, but it doesn't build relationships, and it doesn't bring people into your DMs, to be honest, right? It's actually, this sort of content is very much pushed out to artists because the algorithm knows where to place it. Now, a lot of times for artists who might post that kind of thing, they will just do more of that because it works, and that's great. That can still bring you likes, it can still bring you new followers. But we have to be careful that this is not the only type of content we create. So we can consider that something like visibility content, it's good for reach. But then we still need to have other content that now brings them closer into your world, that maybe you're explaining why painting the edges of the canvas is important to your process or your presentation or something like that, but also getting a sense of the artist behind the work as well. And that's where we start building proximity. And something I mentioned on that same reel, and I'll tag it in the description below, is for the artist, that kind of content can feel very lightweight and frilly and that sort of thing. So when the artist then posts the final artwork, which they think is a more valuable piece of content, the audience doesn't have that same reaction. And again, there's two things at play. It's like what you think when you are posting is important versus how the audience is consuming it. So it's also a good idea to think about how you consume content. What kind of content actually keeps you on the app or keeps you watching somebody's reel or reading somebody's post. And at this point, it's also worth considering who your audience is and actually what you want out of your content or how you want Instagram to serve you. Because, a lot of artists, they want buyers and collectors, but collectors aren't usually interested in only the process or, if you're a ceramicist, the composition of the glaze and things like this isn't the thing that is of most interest to them. They're buying because of how the work makes them feel or what they connect to in the work or what it says about them to actually own it. And I think this is where the content becomes much more powerful, because the goal isn't necessarily to post more, is to help people understand why the work matters and why you're the artist that they should be buying from. And that is a lot less about how it was made. And honestly, even one small shift here can completely change the way people respond to your work online. For example, instead of posting, new painting, acrylic on canvas, 90 by 90 centimeters, you could post something with more prose, right? Like, I keep returning to the darker landscapes because I'm interested in the feeling of standing somewhere between calm and uncertainty. Just even a little sentence or two can suddenly help the viewer, the reader, understand something more about the emotional world of the work, and they have an entry point into it. And this is what starts to create connection. It's not just the visibility. And I think this is also why some artists seem to sell work more effortlessly online, and others are just struggling and wondering what is not landing. So from the outside it can look confusing, because if you think my work is good too, so why does it seem to work for them and not for me? It's often because of what you're not actually seeing is the result of the structure. Their audience already understands them. They already feel connected to the work. They've been taken along on a journey over multiple posts or over, maybe weeks or so. And they already know what that artist is about. So when they release something for sale, it doesn't feel sudden. It feels like a continuation of an existing relationship. And I think this is a really important shift. Because if you understand that, then the goal of content stops being how do I get more likes and becomes how do I build recognition, familiarity, and trust over time. And that's a completely different way of approaching Instagram. And honestly, I think it is a much healthier one too, because suddenly you're not just chasing constant visibility, you're building something cumulative, something that compounds. And this is exactly why I decided to create the workshop I'm running in May called From Noise to Known, because I wanted to make this process much clearer for artists, not in a how do I beat the algorithm kind of way, but in a how do I actually build a body of content that leads somewhere? How do you create content that brings new people in, builds connection over time, and eventually supports sales much more naturally? So that is what we're going to be unpacking over 3 sessions, because I genuinely think most artists don't need to post more. They just need to understand what their content is doing. And once that clicks, everything starts to feel much lighter. We start on the 13th of May. We go for 3 days. It's actually a workshop, not a class. And I'm going to be adding all the details in the show notes with this episode. And I hope you'll be joining us.